Ghostly tales, yet mirrors of human life. Hey everyone! Welcome to Encountering Chinese, Ghostly Tales from Zhai. Today, I'm going to tell you a story called Guzi. And Yu was a tribute student from Shaanxi. He was generous and chivalrous, often releasing small animals back into the wild. Sometimes, when he saw hunters selling captured birds and beasts, he would spend a considerable amount of money to buy and release them. Once, when his uncle's family was holding a funeral, he went to pay his respects. On his way home in the evening, he got lost in a valley while passing through Mount Hua, feeling great fear. Suddenly, he saw a distant light and hurried towards it. After taking a few steps, he saw an old man, hunched over and using a cane, walking briskly along a sloping path. And Yu stopped, intending to ask for directions, but the old man spoke first, asking who he was. And Yu explained that he was lost and guessed that the place with the light ahead must be a village where he planned to seek shelter. The old man said, "This place is far from being a safe haven. Luckily, I came here today. You can come with me and stay at my cottage." And Yu was very pleased. And Yu followed the old man for about a mile and saw a small village. They arrived at a house, and the old man knocked on the courtyard door. An old woman came out to open the door and asked, "Is it you, husband?" The old man replied, "Yes." After they went inside, and Yu noticed that the house was low and cramped. The old man lit a lamp and sat close to Yu, then instructed his wife to prepare some food with the ingredients they had at home. He also told the old woman, "He is not just anyone, he is my benefactor. You are old and have difficulty walking, so call Guzi to serve the guests some wine." After a while, a young woman brought the food into the room. She stood by the old man, glancing at Yu with sidelong eyes. And Yu noticed that the young woman was beautiful, like a fairy. The old man turned and instructed Guzi to warm the wine for the guest. In the corner of the room, a coal stove was burning, and Guzi went to tend to the fire. And Yu asked the old man, "May I ask, who is this young woman to you?" The old man replied, "My surname is Zhang, and I am 70 years old. This is my only daughter. As a farming family, we do not have maids or servants. Because you are not an outsider, I dared to have my wife and daughter come out to meet you. Please do not find it impolite." And Yu then asked, "Where is your son-in-law's family?" The old man answered, "My daughter is not yet married." And Yu praised Guzi's intelligence and beauty, speaking highly of her. The old man was modestly responding when they suddenly heard Guzi cry out. The old man ran into the room to find that the wine had boiled over, causing the flames to rise. The old man extinguished the fire and scolded, "You are a grown girl and don't even know that wine shouldn't boil over?" He then noticed an unfinished straw doll, a zigu, near the stove and became even angrier, scolding, "You are too old to be playing with such children's toys." The old man brought the half-finished zigu to Enyoyu and said, "She was playing with this and let the wine boil over. You praised her earlier, but isn't it shameful?" Enyoyu examined the zigu, noting that it was well crafted with detailed features and clothing. He praised, "Although this doll is indeed a child's toy, the craftsmanship is excellent, showing your daughter's cleverness and attention to detail." The two men returned to their seats and drank wine for a while longer. Guzi frequently came over to pour wine, smiling sweetly and showing no shyness. Enyoyu gazed at Guzi, and love naturally arose in his heart. Suddenly, they heard the old woman calling her husband from the bedroom, and the old man got up and left. Seeing that no one else was around, Enyoyu said to Guzi, "Seeing your celestial beauty, I have lost my soul. I intended to quickly send a matchmaker to propose, but I'm afraid your family might not agree. What should I do?" Guzi held the wine pot and faced the stove, remaining silent as if she had not heard anything. Enyoyu asked several more times, but she still did not respond. Enyoyu slowly moved closer to Guzi, and she suddenly stood up and sternly said, "What are you doing, you arrogant man? Why are you approaching me?" Enyoyu immediately knelt on the ground, begging earnestly. Guzi wanted to leave, but Enyoyu suddenly stood up, blocked her way, and tried to forcefully kiss her. Guzi shouted in a trembling voice, and the old man hurriedly ran into the hall, asking why she was shouting. Enyoyu quickly let go of Guzi, returned to his seat, and felt deeply ashamed and terrified. At this moment, Guzi calmly said to her father, "I saw the wine boiling over again. If the guest hadn't come over to help, the wine pot would have melted." Hearing this, Enyoyu finally felt relieved and was even more grateful to Guzi. He remained infatuated with Guzi but gave up any improper thoughts. Later, Enyoyu found an excuse to pretend to be drunk and leave the table, and Guzi also left. The old man prepared the bedding for the guest, then closed the door and left. Enyoyu tossed and turned all night, unable to sleep. Before dawn, he called the old man out to bid farewell and left. After returning home, Enyoyu immediately asked a good friend to visit the old man's house and propose marriage. However, the friend returned after a whole day without even finding Guzi's house. So, Enyoyu ordered a horse to be prepared, and he and a servant set off along the old path. When they reached the original location, they found only steep cliffs and rugged mountains, with no sign of a village. They inquired in a nearby village but found that there was no household with the surname Zhang. Enyoyu had no choice but to return home in disappointment. Back home, he couldn't eat or sleep, and he eventually fell ill, becoming delirious. He could barely drink thin porridge without feeling nauseous, and he constantly called out Guzi's name in his delirium. His family was puzzled but could only stay by his side day and night, feeling that he might not live much longer. One night, the servants who were supposed to be watching over Enyoyu fell asleep from exhaustion. In his groggy state, Enyoyu felt someone shaking him. He opened his eyes slightly and saw Guzi standing by his bed. As his mind gradually cleared, he looked closely at Guzi, tears streaming down his face. Guzi lowered her head and smiled at him, saying, "Silly boy, do you really have to pine away like this?" Then she climbed onto the bed, sat on Yoyu's legs, and placed her hands on his temples. And Yoyu immediately felt a strange fragrance, like musk, permeating his nostrils and seeping into his very bones. She pressed for a while, and Yoyu suddenly broke into a sweat, first on his head, then all over his body. Guzi whispered, "There are too many people in this house, so it's not convenient for me to stay tonight. I'll come back to see you in 3 days." Then she took a few steamed buns from her embroidered sleeve, placed them on the bedside table, and quietly left. By midnight, Yoyu had stopped sweating and felt hungry. He reached for the buns and ate them, not knowing what filling they had, only that they were delicious. He ate 3 in a row, then covered the remaining buns with his clothes and fell into a deep sleep until dawn, feeling much better. 3 days later, after finishing the buns, Yoyu felt greatly refreshed. He asked his family to leave him alone but worried that Guzi might have trouble finding her way in, so he went out and unlocked all the doors. Soon after, Guzi arrived. She smiled and said, "Silly young man, aren't you going to thank your doctor?" Overjoyed, Yoyu embraced Guzi, and they shared a tender moment. Afterward, Guzi said, "The reason I risked danger and humiliation to come find you was to repay your great kindness. But we cannot be permanent husband and wife, so you should make other plans soon." And Yoyu was silent for a long time before asking, "We were strangers before. When did I ever do your family a favor? I can't remember at all." Guzi didn't answer directly, only saying, "Think about it yourself." And Yoyu insisted on being her permanent husband, but Guzi replied, "It's already risky for me to meet you in secret at night. Becoming your permanent wife is even more impossible." Hearing this, Yoyu became sad and distressed. Guzi said, "If you want us to be together, come to my home tomorrow night." And Yoyu's sorrow turned to joy, and he asked, "Your home must be far from here. How did you get here with your tiny feet?" Guzi said, "Actually, I never went home. The deaf old woman at the east end of the village is my aunt. For your sake, I've been staying at her house all this time. My family must be wondering where I am by now." And Yoyu and Guzi spent the night together, and he found her breath and skin fragrantly alluring. He asked, "What kind of perfume do you use to make your flesh and bones smell so sweet?" Guzi replied, "I was born this way, it's not from any perfume." And Yoyu was even more astonished. Early the next morning, Guzi got up to leave, bidding Yoyu farewell. Worried about getting lost on his way to her home, Yoyu asked for directions. Guzi promised to wait for him along the way. As dusk settled, Yoyu rode towards the Zhang family home, and sure enough, Guzi was waiting for him halfway. Together, they arrived at the Zhang's residence, where the old man and his wife greeted them warmly. The meal was simple, with a few plates of mountain vegetables and wild greens laid out haphazardly on the table. After dinner, the old man invited Enyoyu to rest, but Guzi did not even glance at him, leaving him puzzled and full of doubts. It wasn't until late at night that Guzi finally came to him, smiling as she said, "My parents kept chattering on and on, refusing to sleep. Thank you for waiting so long." The two of them then shared a tender moment. Guzi told Enyoyu, "This might be our last meeting. It will be difficult to see each other again after tonight." Enyoyu, alarmed, asked her why. Guzi explained, "My father finds this village too desolate and plans to move far away. Our meetings will likely end after tonight." Enyoyu did not want her to leave, tossing and turning in sadness. As they lingered together, dawn began to break. Suddenly, the old man burst into the room, shouting angrily, "You wretched girl, you've disgraced our family's honor." Guzi, terrified at the sight of her father, hurriedly fled. The old man stormed out, cursing as he went. Enyoyu, overwhelmed with shame and fear, could only slink back home in disgrace. For several days, Enyoyu wandered restlessly, unable to find peace due to his longing for Guzi. He contemplated sneaking back to the Zhang home at night, thinking he could climb over the wall to see her again. He reasoned that since the old man had mentioned his past kindness, he might not be overly reproached even if caught. Thus, he set off towards the Zhang home under the cover of night. As he struggled through the mountains, he found himself increasingly disoriented, filled with fear. Just as he was about to search for a way back, he glimpsed some houses in the valley and, relieved, headed towards them. He discovered a grand mansion, seemingly belonging to a noble family, with the courtyard gates still open. He asked the gatekeeper about the Zhang family, and a maid came out, asking, "Who is looking for the Zhang family in the middle of the night?" Enyoyu replied, "The Zhang family are my relatives. I happened to pass by but couldn't find the way to their home." The maid said, "Don't ask about the Zhang family. This is Guzi's aunt's house. Guzi is here now. I'll go tell her." Shortly after, the maid returned and invited Enyoyu inside. As he reached the veranda, Guzi came out quickly to greet him. She told the maid, "Mr. N has traveled half the night and must be exhausted. Please prepare a bed for him to rest." Before long, Guzi and Enyoyu were holding hands, settling down together. Enyoyu asked, "Why is there no one else in your aunt's house?" Guzi replied, "My aunt is away, and she left me to watch the house. How fortunate we are to meet here, this must be fate." However, as they embraced, Enyoyu noticed a strong, fishy odor coming from Guzi, making him suspicious. Guzi then wrapped her arms around his neck and suddenly licked his nostrils with her tongue. He felt a sharp pain, like a needle piercing his brain. Terrified, he tried to escape, but his body felt as if it were bound by thick ropes. Shortly after, he lost consciousness, drifting into a state of bewilderment. As Nyoyu had not returned home, his family searched everywhere they could think of. Someone mentioned having seen Nyoyu on a mountain path at dusk. His family headed to the mountains and, to their shock, found him lying dead and naked at the bottom of a cliff. Everyone was bewildered and had no idea how this had happened. They carried his body home in sorrow. While the family was gathered around Nyoyu, mourning his death, a young woman arrived to pay her respects. She entered the house from outside, wailing loudly. Approaching Nyoyu's body, she touched him and pressed her nose against his, with her tears flowing into his nostrils. She cried out, "Oh heavens! How could you be so foolish?" Her voice gradually became hoarse, and it was a long while before she stopped crying. She then told Nyoyu's family, "Please leave his body out for 7 days and do not bury him yet." The family, not knowing who she was, started to ask her questions, but she ignored them and left, tears still in her eyes. As they tried to persuade her to stay, she did not look back, and when they followed her outside, she had vanished in an instant. The family suspected she might be a celestial being and decided to follow her instructions. That night, she returned and, just like before, wept bitterly over Nyoyu's body. On the 7th night, Nyoyu suddenly came back to life, turning over and letting out a groan. His family was astonished. At that moment, Guzi walked into the room again, and the two of them wept together. Nyoyu, unable to speak, gestured with his hand for everyone to leave. Guzi then took out a bundle of herbs and brewed about a liter of soup, which she fed to Nyoyu at his bedside. After drinking the soup, Nyoyu could speak again almost instantly. He sighed and said, "It was you who killed me and you who saved me." He then recounted his experiences to Guzi. After listening, Guzi explained, "It was a snake spirit that transformed into my likeness to deceive you. The light you saw when you got lost was the eyes of that snake." And Nyoyu asked, "How did you bring me back to life? Are you an immortal?" Guzi replied, "I've long wanted to tell you, but I feared you would be frightened. 5 years ago, didn't you buy and release a captured roe deer on the path to Mount Hua?" And Nyoyu confirmed, "Yes, I did." Guzi continued, "That roe deer was my father. When I mentioned you had done a great favor for my family, that was the reason. In fact, 2 days ago, the king of hell had already assigned you to be reincarnated into the family of Wang Zhuzheng in the western village. My father and I pleaded with the king of hell, but he refused our request, saying you were already dead. My father then offered to forfeit his many years of cultivation and die in your place. After 7 days of pleading, the king of hell reluctantly altered the judgment. Our meeting today is truly a stroke of luck. However, although you have been revived, your body will remain weak, numb, and insensible. To fully recover, you need to mix the snake spirit's blood with wine and drink it." And Nyoyu, filled with hatred, worried about how he could catch the snake spirit. Guzi reassured him, It's not difficult. However, it will result in many lives being harmed and will prevent me from ascending to immortality for 100 years. The snake's lair is under the old cliff. You can gather some straw and burn it at the entrance between 3 p.m. and 5 p.m. Be ready with your bow and arrows, and you should be able to catch the snake spirit. She then bid him farewell, saying, I am saddened that I cannot stay with you forever. For your sake, I have lost 70% of my magical power. Please forgive me for not being able to stay by your side. For the past month, I have felt movement in my belly and believe I am pregnant. Whether it's a boy or a girl, I will bring the child to you in a year. With tears streaming down her face, she left. After a night, Enyoyu found that he had lost all feeling below his waist. Even scratching there caused no pain or itch. He told his family what Guzi had said. Following her instructions, the family went to the snake's lair and set a large fire outside. Soon, a huge white snake emerged from the flames, and the family seized the opportunity to shoot arrows at it, successfully killing it. After the fire died down, they entered the cave and found that hundreds of snakes of various sizes had also been burned to death, and the cave reeked of a foul odor. The family returned with the snake's blood, and Enyoyu took it for 3 days. Gradually, he regained the ability to move his legs and could walk again after half a year. Later, while walking alone in the valley, Enyoyu encountered an old lady who handed him a baby wrapped in a small blanket, saying, "My daughter sends her regards." Just as he was about to ask about Guzi, the old lady vanished. Enyoyu unwrapped the swaddling cloth and saw that it was a boy. He took the child home and raised him alone, never marrying again. At the end of the story, the author adds this commentary. Although humans are different from animals, the distinction is minimal. This is not a definitive conclusion. When one receives kindness from others, they should feel grateful and repay it, remembering the favor for life. Sometimes, in this regard, humans feel ashamed compared to animals. As for Guzi, she initially placed her wisdom in simplicity and ultimately placed her deep affection in detachment. This shows that the height of wisdom is simplicity, and the height of deep affection is detachment. A being with such an attitude is a true immortal. Alright. That's all for today's ghostly tale, Guzi. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Please also encourage everyone to comment and share more. We'll see you in the next episode.